The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. It is one of the most coveted trophies in the world, but are gold medals really gold? Well, mostly, they're not. The gold medals given out these days are nearly entirely silver and are plated with pure gold to give them that iconic sheen. Silver medals are, of course, made with silver, and bronze medals are a combination of copper and other metals like tin or zinc. And while winning an Olympic medal is priceless, the value of the materials in the medal are not. In recent games, some of the materials used to make the medals have come from recycled cell phones. Mass Mutual celebrates women's sports history and understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
We will talk about the 2025 MotoGP rider market on the Race MotoGP podcast this week, and that's largely your fault, listeners, because you asked questions about it, but also something has actually happened. The first new signing, Pecco Bagnaia, has re-signed for Ducati, but we have our first new arrival on the 2025 grid. Ducati has announced that Fermin Aldeguer will be part of its lineup next year, which is not a surprise because that's been rumoured for quite some time. Hasn't announced which team he'll be with, but the smart money is on Pramac. I'm Matt Beer, and joining me to discuss this is Simon Patterson, and joining me to bang on endlessly about Fermin Aldeguer, as is his habit on this podcast, is Val Khorounzhiy. So Val, you can start with this one. I imagine most of our listeners avidly follow Moto2 as well as MotoGP, so know a fair bit about what Aldeguer is capable of. But for those who are new to this storyline, if Pedro Acosta is a 10 in terms of rookie hype excitement, where do you place Aldeguer coming into next season, and why?
8.5. Because I guess the upside is maybe potentially thereabout, but certainly more variance in terms of results in his results in the Grand Prix racing so far. But also he's very young, like Acosta. But Fermin Aldeguer is still 18. He will be 19 next month, and he's already has a MotoGP deal in his pocket for 2 years and potentially an additional 2, which shows you what Ducati thinks of the rider it signed. I mean, I think you sometimes call me in private and maybe in public, I don't remember, a Fermin Aldeguer fan, which again I resent, as always. We go back to the fan thing.
Advocate, I would say. Most of my enthusiasm for his lobbyist. That's good. Yeah, most of my enthusiasm for Aldeguer's potential and future is down to your lobbying in our work.
Yeah,
chat while he's achieving things at MotoGP.
You know what? I'll take Aldeguer lobbyist. I think that's perfectly fair. Ethically compromised, you could say. No, but I am not as big of an enthusiast as clearly Gigi Dall'Igna of Ducati, whose quotes in the announcement, in Ducati's announcement of Aldeguer, included words such as thrilled and one of the best riders of this new generation of MotoGP. I mean, that's a lot. That's big excitement. And I think once Ducati sort of falls head over heels for a rider, it really backs him. It really goes to bat for him. And it does make you think of Pecco Bagnaia. That's not to say that Fermin Aldeguer will have the same impact on MotoGP as Pecco Bagnaia, but Pecco Bagnaia was another rider who was signed a year in advance on a 2-year deal with presumably a plan to the factory team. I imagine there is something like that for Aldeguer. I think those extra 2 option years are not necessarily with Pramac in mind. So, with Pecco Bagnaia, Gigi Dall'Igna liked what he saw right away and just kept at it, even when Pecco Bagnaia didn't necessarily adapt to MotoGP the greatest. And now Pecco is who he is, and he's mega. Aldeguer ended last Moto2 season by winning 4 races in a row. They were fantastic 4 wins. Like, they were genuinely exceptional, and I think you have to be a massive talent to be able to do something like that, especially at the age of 18. He does have Moto2 experience, considerably so at this point, but again, he's accrued considerable Moto2 experience while being 18 and 17 and 16. He's the kind of bet Ducati can make. You know, he's also had some dips in Grand Prix racing, and actually one of those dips came last weekend? I don't remember. All the calendar is gone, but yeah, the Pirelli tires have arrived to Moto2, and I'm not entirely sure what went on with Aldeguer's race, but it was really bad, while basically all the other riders on the same bike were really good. But Aldeguer chewed up his tires and was running like 2 or 3 seconds off the pace routinely per lap. I don't think that's indicative of his talent level. I suspect that's not really telling the story. So I don't think Ducati's having buyer's remorse or whatever.
No, we have a few listener questions to answer on that topic later, because the start of the Moto2 season has perplexed a few people. So we will dig into that a little bit.
So we will get there, but basically, even if he finishes like 20th for the rest of the season, then gets into MotoGP and runs 4 seconds off the pace, Ducati is the manufacturer that is best positioned not to really be bothered about that in any meaningful way. So it's not like when Suzuki signs Joan Mir straight into the factory team or anything like that. Ducati is clearly super excited, but it could also hedge its bets. And it couldn't get Acosta. Acosta was always going to KTM. So this is absolutely the next best bet you can make, I think.
The other element that is interesting with this signing is the implications. Now, that it may be he doesn't end up at Pramac, but there are logical reasons to suspect. Partly because it'll be the top spec bike, and this sounds like a rider Ducati wants on its best machinery. But also, Pramac's a team which, for very different reasons, needn't be too sure about having either its current riders next year. Jorge Martin wants a factory ride. There is no way he will settle for being on a satellite team next season. And Franco Morbidelli, as you know, a horrible couple of years followed by a horrible off-season injury that has made this season look very, very difficult already. So we've talked a lot about, obviously, the rider market and those guys and where they might go next. Is it fair, Simon, to say this is the first of 2 new signings for Pramac for next season?
I mean, Jorge Martin is leaving Pramac. I'm willing to put quite a bit of money on that. That is just everything he's saying, everything he's done. There's no way he's staying put there. There has to be a change coming, because, I mean, even last weekend at the first round, he was firing shots saying he didn't want to be there next year, essentially, in as many words. So I'd be very, very surprised if he remains. But I think that the fact that everyone knows that he's leaving maybe buys Franco Morbidelli a bit of time. He's got a bit of a lifeline. You know, Pramac now have Martin's replacement signed before Martin leaves. So essentially that gives them a chance to kind of suss out Morbidelli, to hope that once he comes back from his preseason injury, that there was a bit of the old sort of pre-knee injury Morbidelli there. I'd imagine that while a lot of people are going to be thinking that he's under increased pressure now because of this signing, it's actually the opposite. He's actually, this has taken a bit of the pressure off. It's given him a bit of breathing room, and he's got a few rounds to kind of get his head dialed back in and to get sorted.
And we should address the elephant in the room. We're talking about it being Pramac, but you can substitute Pramac for Ducati satellite team. So whichever Ducati team runs the Ducati contracted riders that aren't in Ducati Red. Because Pramac was not named in the announcement. There was nothing on socials from Pramac. And we think this has to do with the fact that Pramac probably hasn't signed yet for 2025 with Ducati. And we know, and by we I mean Simon, that's his information. Simon knows, but also I know because he's told me, he's my source on this one, that there is potential interest in Pramac as a satellite team from not Ducati, specifically from Yamaha. And actually, we also knew that from Lynn Jarvis speaking before the preseason, because he said there were 3 satellite teams out of contract, and he named Pramac as one of them, like specifically made a point to name it, which if you were just assuming that Pramac stays with Ducati, you wouldn't bring it up. But clearly, I think Yamaha does see a card to potentially play there or thereabouts. It doesn't so it matters because Pramac's a really well-run, clearly very good operation, but it doesn't so much matter for Fermin Aldeguer because he'll just be in whatever the Ducati satellite team number one will be. So it's not about, I've seen a lot of people on social media wonder whether it's about just choosing the best environment for him between Pramac, VR46 and Gresini. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's literally just contractual. Ducati is waiting to see which team will run its contracted riders and presumably factory spec bikes, although it would probably make some sense to give Aldeguer a hand-me-down and to give somebody else in the camp a work spec. Like, I don't know, Marc Marquez at Gresini again. I don't know, probably not, but yeah.
I mean, even if you're Pramac and you're very, very happy with your current Ducati deal, you're still paying them, right? So every satellite team is paying something to every factory, regardless of how strong the relationship is. So even if you're super confident and happy there, you're going to play a bit of the game. You're going to see how much Yamaha offer you. You're going to see if you can use that to get a better deal from Ducati, save a few euros. It's just the nature of the business, and it is a business. Whenever it comes to factories and satellites, it is a business. So it's not a surprise that they've not signed anything. It's not a surprise that Yamaha are interested. It makes sense, really, for me from that point of view.
It feels like VR46 has been doing the same. So VR46 is the other team that's
100%
on the radar for Yamaha and has been linked even maybe more strongly, well, definitely more strongly to a Yamaha switch, but has been publicly insistent that it's basically already agreed an extension with Ducati and just needs to iron out the final details. There's Uccio Salucci said in Qatar there was one request and didn't specify what it was. Can it only be works bike? Like one works bike? That would be what I would be guessing. One works bike for Marco Bezzecchi, presumably, or if Bezzecchi signs a works deal somewhere, I don't know, Fabio Di Giannantonio or whoever. But it also could just be VR46 using the Ducati deal to get an even more favorable financial term from Yamaha. And I don't want to say we know, but there's really good reason to suspect that series promoter Dorna and everybody around there would much prefer one of these two teams to go to Yamaha.
Yeah.
Very much so. And would probably, behind the scenes, tell them, okay, one of you two has to sign this Yamaha deal for a lot of money. And finally, one of them is going to go, fine, okay, Yamaha, pay us to run your terrible M1s, which hopefully won't be so terrible next year.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely what it's looking like, and especially with a bit of news that we've ran on the website over the weekend about BMW potentially coming back in 27. That very much closes the door for those two grid spots that were formerly Suzuki's. They're not going to bring in a new satellite team to give Yamaha, that leeway that the KTM was denied last year. That ain't happening now. If there's another manufacturer waiting in the wings to step in here, they will have to poach someone.
Not meaning this to sound too blunt or pragmatic, but Ducati potentially wouldn't fight too hard to keep hold of any of its current three satellites, not because of anything about their quality, but does it need three satellite teams? It's bringing in cash, but are two adequate for what it needs, really?
Yeah, the more satellite teams you have, the less everyone else has. And that is how Gigi Giglia thinks. 100%. They're getting more data at the expense of everyone else having less data.
No, that's true.
And you have to remember that Gigi in particular seems to have a bit of fear that the concessions that have been given to the Japanese manufacturers are going to allow them to be competitive again soon.
Yeah.
So they're not going to give away any more advantage to a Japanese factory than they have to right now, considering that they believe they've already given away a huge advantage to them in the form of the concessions. Yeah. So they're not going to give it up willingly. No way.
But at the same time, like financially, there's just no way the status of a fourth Ducati team can be the same as second Yamaha. There's no chance. So it's just a question of how cheap can you offer those bikes that the other team will know can get you to the podium every weekend. And
it's a question of relative need, isn't it, for the manufacturers involved?
Yeah, and there are teams in MotoGP whose desire is to try and be on the podium every weekend, not to develop young talent, not to be the partner in a satellite affair the way that say Lucio Cecchinello has been. That isn't the goal of Gresini Ducati. They just want to win with whatever package is available to do it on.
Which is amazing, isn't it? It's just amazing that you would like you wouldn't just automatically take the best pay package. Basically, that's the part that in big business, and MotoGP is big business, you just don't normally encounter a situation where there's any other consideration but basically rent seeking and staying afloat. So kudos MotoGP on that one for the atmosphere that it clearly cultivated and the set of priorities that exist within the paddock. People actually care about winning. Amazing, isn't it? Crazy.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Let's get on to your questions, and we're going to stay with, well, this is sort of 2025 rider market, but mid-2024 in a way. We have two questions about the possibility of mid-season changes at KTM. The first is from Zach, who very kindly calls us insightful and hilarious, which is very much appreciated. So Zach points out that Pedro Acosta is on a one-year deal with Tech 3 Gas. It looks highly likely that he will go to the factory KTM team in 2025. Red Bull is now a sponsor of both those teams. And Zach says, with the above in mind, could it be possible that we see an interesting scenario at some point in the season where Acosta is by far the best KTM out on the grid? So Red Bull and KTM agreed to promote him for a factory ride for 2025 and then promote him to race on a factory bike during 2024, effectively using him as its wildcard rider instead of Dani Pedrosa. They've got 6 wildcards to use. Is this even possible in the rules, and would we like to see it implemented if it was possible? And on a similar KTM mid-season changes note, Duncan from Glasgow, who threw a few questions in for this episode, asks, if Augusto Fernandez continues to struggle on the other Tech 3 Gas and hasn't improved by Jerez at the end of April, do you think there's a chance of him being replaced by Pol Espargaro, his 2023 teammate, who was the person who made way for Acosta in the end? So, Val, tackle whichever one of those you want first, an Acosta mid-season promotion or a Fernandez mid-season exit.
Yeah, let's start with the Acosta mid-season promotion one. It is entirely eminently plausible that Pedro Acosta is the best KTM by the end of the season or the middle of the season. I think that's not outside of the realm of outcomes. And it is certainly possible that by then KTM will have already decided that he's in KTM Orange in 2025. In fact, I would be surprised if that doesn't end up happening for 2025. Not really based on anything I've heard, just based on, it's just what makes sense. That makes sense to me. I don't think there's any chance of a mid-season swap, and certainly not to a wildcard test team position. And there's two primary reasons for that. Reason number one is regulatory. So 6 wildcards, yes, but it's 3 at the start of the season and 3 at the end. So it has to be 3 before the summer break and 3 after if you're using all of them. You can't just stick all 6 or 5 of the 6 into the closing area of the season. And they're definitely already using up one for Dani Pedrosa and probably maybe another one at some point in the early season. Reason number 2 is just you would not separate him from the crew that he's learning the MotoGP ropes with right now. You would not. Also, I think you would not do this to Hervé Poncharal of the Tech 3 team, who, if you saw the materials MotoGP has put up, in where an absolutely delighted Poncharal shows up to Acosta's pit box after the race and, you know, is effusive and like, you have no idea what you've just done, how well you did, but you'll know. Poncharal is clearly over the moon about finally having like a true elite star in his garage, and that's part of what he will have wanted in signing the KTM deal. Yes, it's, you know, it's going to be good financials, it's going to be good spec, but also you want, you know, if you are entrusted young talent, then he will consider that KTM, at least for a year, will just let him get on with having that talent and let him get on with having a rider of this caliber. So sweeping the rug from out under him, I mean, there's so much to lose and virtually, I think, nothing to gain, honestly. So no, I think he's just staying at Tech 3, and the wild cards are going to be distributed between Dani Pedrosa and Pol Espargaro.
So, first of all, the Augusto question, just to address that really quickly. I think Augusto's had a rough start to the season. It won't last forever. He will improve, especially to a point where he would be better than a jettisoned in Paul. So I think he will be safe. What happens beyond this season, I don't know, but right now he will stay out at the end of the year. On the other hand, I think there's a very good chance that Pedro Acosta will finish this season in orange, not in red. I see a swap with Miller as completely logical if they announce before too long that Miller's going to not be there next year and that Pedro's going to be in factory colours. I don't see why you wouldn't do everything you possibly can to speed up his development and put him in the fast lane, into a factory team, into title contention, given that this is no ordinary rider. Yeah, that's the thing. If it was anyone else, if it was anyone but a kind of a once in a generation talent, there wouldn't be a case for it. But this is a Marc Marquez, this is a Valentino Rossi, this is who we're dealing with now. It's looking increasingly like that's the case. So if you've got an opportunity to get him closer to winning a championship quickly, you do it. And at the end of the day, if he's looking like he's going to be winning races by the midpoint of the season, which isn't entirely unlikely, then arguably he is in a position to fight for a championship next year. So you just jump him in. You say, sorry, Jack, you've had your chance. If he continues like he started this season, then it is the easiest decision in my mind. And we've already talked about how some teams in MotoGP are motivated solely by winning and how others have a slightly different mentality to it. The generous way to describe Hervé is that he's a team player. He will do what KTM ask of him. If that means, a swap in the riders and taking a Jack Miller, the perhaps slightly more unkind way to describe him is someone that's a little bit more mercenary and will take the money. I mean, this is the guy who switched really, really competitive, at the time, satellite Yamahas for a rather unproven KTM because they offered him a giant wedge of cash. I think if they offer him another giant wedge of cash to take Jack Miller for 6 months, he'll happily do it and will still manage to come out of it smiling because he'll milk the PR machine that is Jack Miller better than Jack can be milked in factory colours anyway. To me, it just is the most increasingly logical step to make.
Let me actually just revisit the Fernandez thing for a second. I think regardless of how Augusto Fernandez performs, Pol Espargaro is just not returning to the grid. He's already got his TV role. Even at Valencia last year, he did not sound like somebody who's made his peace with being done as a MotoGP full-time rider. And I think for a mid-season change, like KTM, again, I think really just does not want to be seen as needlessly ruthless. And for a mid-season change to happen, there would have to be a good reason there would have to be a rider who makes sense to slot into there, who like you really just need on the bike and you need to make the most of the time. And Paul Espargaro is not that rider. He is not the future. With all due respect to a guy whose MotoGP career I respect a lot.
The only thing I have to come back on there, Val, is that I think the only thing that KTM don't like is being called needlessly ruthless after the fact.
Which they will be.
Of course they will. But they are repeatedly ruthless in their decisions. And they're not the biggest fan of it after someone calls them it, but it's generally justified and they keep doing it over and over again. And I don't think Miller will be any more on the receiving end of some good fortune than the likes of Danilo Petrucci and Remy Gardner.
Alex asks, Alex outlines a scenario for the 2025 rider market and says, is there anything standing in the way of Jorge Martin on a factory Ducati, Marc Marquez back to Honda, and Fabio Quartararo to Aprilia, and then Joan Mir can do the Honda job at Yamaha? Right, quick verdict on that scenario. We have made our predictions recently. I think some of those were actually the Marc back to Honda was definitely in there. But I think other than that, I think Alex is going quite different from where we were. What do you think of that theory, Simon, for who'll be where next season?
So the biggest thing standing in the way of Martin de facto Ducati is Nea Bastianini. The biggest thing in the way of Marc Marquez returning to Honda is Honda's development not being good enough. And the biggest thing standing in the way of Fabio Quartararo going to Aprilia is a giant check from Yamaha and a slightly better motorbike.
Yeah.
as to keep it as succinct as I can.
Yeah. Because there is increasingly, I think specifically Italian media is getting excited about the prospect of Fabio Quartararo already talking to Aprilia. And Fabio obviously has been showing everybody who will listen that he's willing to walk from Yamaha. Now, part of that will be a negotiation tactic to get the biggest possible extra on his Yamaha salary, like basically the extra bonus for riding a bad bike. But I think it could happen even without like the Piaggio group making him a crazy offer. I think it is genuinely eminently plausible in my brain that Fabio would just gets fed up, just wants to enjoy things again, because I just, for all of the talk of how he's accepted his lot in life with the M1 doesn't look or sound very fun. And he is a more impatient guy than most in terms of getting MotoGP success, which is fine. That's not a criticism. I think he would be well within his rights to walk out on Yamaha right now. In fact, there is a part of me that says he absolutely 100% should do it. And if there's an Aprilia offer on the table, then he should take it. But that's when we'll apparently, the feeling is we'll find this one out pretty quickly as to whether Fabio really will take this sort of plunge. And I think Aprilia would have him because they would be insane not to. For me, the biggest thing that stands in the way of Marc Marquez to Honda is that I suddenly find myself believing that he'll go to Factory Red next year. I'm starting to buy it. It's starting to make sense to me because he is basically the same type of signing as Jorge Martin would be, but with less longevity in terms of years, but also equally like a disruptive presence. You either go the safe route and you keep an Nea Bastianini, but if you want to roll the dice, then I think it's down to Marquez or Martin, and Marquez through his profile, through the fact that he's, a bit more experienced, a bit more legendary, sorry, Jorge. I think he would actually, like, if you are going to rock the boat, then as good as Jorge Martin is, and he is awesome, but as good as he is, if you're going to rock the boat, you have to go big. And the biggest you can go is Marc Marquez in your factory colors. And I think the fact that Gigi Dall'Igna was front and center of the Fermin Aldeguer negotiations, the fact that Gigi Dall'Igna looks increasingly now like the guy with all the decision-making power at Ducati, he is also, we know, the one who was most fond of the idea of Marc Marquez on one of his bikes. I think he'd make a coherent case for putting him in Factory Red for a bit. And maybe 2 years later, I don't know, maybe Fermin Aldeguer is ready and he comes in. And Nea Bastianini maybe goes to Pramac or whatever Pramac is. And Jorge Martin finds himself a lucrative deal at Honda or something like that. And Joan Mir to Yamaha, a lot of dominoes have to fall before that one, don't they? They would be interesting. But Mir and Rins at Yamaha, they always find each other. Long lost brothers.
Oh, yeah.
Up and down the MotoGP grid.
Yeah, maybe they do one more reunion. I think we might be done with the rider market there. Our next question is in voice note form from Dan from North Yorkshire, who threw in a few as ever. We really appreciate that, Dan. We've grabbed a couple of your other questions to pepper elsewhere through the episode, but let's start with this one on the calendar.
Hello, it's Dan here from North Yorkshire. I've got some questions for the pod. Obviously, the calendar is too long at the moment, but if we reduce it to maybe 16 or 18 races, that would obviously mean losing some of the tracks that we currently use. So what are your thoughts or ideas on some kind of like rotational calendar where we've got, like a set of 6 to 8 tracks that rotate for 3 or 4 race slots each year? Some of the ones that don't have as much history behind them or newer. And how would that actually work? How would the tracks or the event organisers, be interested in that?
So I've got a feeling Simon has opinions about what Dan suggested there. So Simon, over to you.
Well, I mean, so I've pulled up this year's calendar. This year's calendar is supposedly 22 races. It's not. It's going to be 20. So we've already got rid of 2 because Argentina is off the grid for the foreseeable future while their slightly turbulent president rules over the country. And it's sounding increasingly likely that the Kazakhstan's not going to happen again this year, which no one in the paddock is really too upset about. So we only have to chop 2 races to meet Dan's criteria. And I mean, Portimao and Valencia are right there. Problem solved. Portimao there's no MotoGP history at Portimao. It's a relatively new addition. And it's a track that every time we go there, seemingly someone gets really badly hurt. There has been 3 huge crashes there in the course of the last 18 months, less. There's one that essentially ended Paul Espargaro's career, one that has destroyed Franco Morbidelli's entire preseason, and one that tragically left Carlos Tata in a wheelchair. If we never went back there, I would not be too upset at all. I know fans like it. I know that riders like riding it, but it isn't safe enough. So there's one gone right away. And secondly, finishing the season at the concrete jungle that is Valencia in pouring rain on a circuit where no one can overtake is a waste of MotoGP. And if Valencia disappeared tomorrow, I would not be sad at all. Finish the season in Jerez, problem solved. It's sunny, it's warm, it's a great circuit, and we're down to 18 circuits right away. There was talk a while back that we were going to rotate some of the Spanish circuits. I mean, if we were to say rotate Barcelona and Aragon every year, I don't think that would be particularly problematic either. Once you start looking at that, we're down to 17 tracks, and that is, for me, the perfect season is 18 rounds and 3 tests instead of the 2 tests and starting the season with supposedly 22 and then ending up with 20 because some of them always fall apart because Dorna deals. If we had 17 confirmed circuits, space for a new edition, which, hopefully the way that things are looking at the minute, the next new edition I'm hearing rumors of is East Coast USA, which we'd happily take. That rounds out the calendar quite nicely. Yeah, always good for me in that.
I agree with a lot of that. I don't quite share the disdain towards Valencia that Simon has, that I think may have come up on this podcast before.
Once or twice.
Yeah. For me, it's going to be a boring answer, so I don't actually know why I waded in even. For me, the answer is rotate any of them. I don't care. Sorry. There's a couple of them that are maybe, I guess, non-negotiable. Like you couldn't shelve Assen. Just couldn't.
No.
I think you probably couldn't shelve Phillip Island, even though sometimes
without a rider strike.
Yeah, even though sometimes I do feel a bit uncomfortable watching races there. It is an amazing track, but the faster these bikes get, the more like through holes in your fingers the watching of these races becomes really. The rest of them do whatever. I don't know. It's MotoGP is in, obviously racing has got worse, but it's still in the sort of position where you can get something decent basically wherever you are. Like, for all of Simon's hatred of Valencia, last year's Valencia races were good.
I will say that while I don't quite agree with Val's do whatever you want theory, I would happily do whatever you want if it means we go back to 18 races, because starting the year trying to plan 22 is hellish. So, yeah. If you tell me that we have to do, take extreme measures to cut anything, yeah, I'm on board.
Don't chop Sachsenring because it's close to where I am.
And it's cool. Although the first bit isn't cool, but the other waterfall bit, love it.
I like having one that's super now,
Yeah, definitely.
And that is
so
Sachsenring.
on that topic, now, Simon, you travel to all these races. I don't. My experience of the circuits on the calendar is relatively limited, but my calendar blind spot is Buriram. For whatever reason, that was the peak at which my brain could take no more MotoGP circuits, and I can never even picture the layout, picture what the racing like is there. I've just got a complete blind spot for its existence almost. Is that wrong? Is that just a complete coincidence, or is it just like a nothing track that you wouldn't miss?
We've had some good races there. We had an epic Marc Marquez Fabio Quartararo battle in 2019. Yeah. But also, when you go to Buriram, the fan experience of it is next level.
Okay.
It's insane. It's like a town of 30,000 that imports 150,000 MotoGP fans for the weekend, and a main grandstand that seats 25,000 right above pit lane. The atmosphere there is something else. It really is. It's one of the ones that I would be very, very loath to chop. For many of the same reasons why I am actually quite sad that Argentina's gone, because it was also a great fan experience, albeit it was a complete pain in the ass for the paddock to get to.
With Buriram, I can't recall a single corner, but I would give a personal anecdote that it is probably my most enjoyable MotoGP race trip that I can remember, and it came as the second half of a journalistic back-to-back with the Russian Grand Prix weekend for Formula One at Sochi. So I went Sochi basically immediately to Buriram, like stopping by home for like 4 or 5 hours. And I still really got a kick of it. And I hate travel, hate it. So the fact that I enjoyed it so much in Thailand, going from Bangkok to Buriram, I think it would have my vote to stick around. As for the layout, I can't remember a single thing. Couldn't remember a single corner. I don't remember what it looks like. I don't know. There's like a football stadium nearby. That's all I got. But it is a good race. I don't know. You can rotate it. You can rotate anything. I've changed my mind. Rotate Assen, rotate Phillip Island. I don't care. Run them all at the same circuit every week. I don't care.
Now, one thing that I do think, on a slight note of seriousness, is that if there is an opportunity to rotate, if that's something that should seriously be considered, it has to start with Europe, because it's the fans in the rest of the world that get shafted.
Yeah.
So it has to start with Europe, where we have a dearth of races. If you're from Germany and you lose the Sachsenring, big whoop, you can drive to Austria or Netherlands. If you lose Thailand and you're on a Thai salary, which is considerably less than Europe, then your next race is still like a 5-hour flight away. Not a 5-hour drive away. So that is something that that needs to be taken into consideration. One track that I think we should genuinely be considering adding at every possible opportunity is Kyalami, because it's a crying shame that Africa doesn't have a single race. That has to be taken into account as well.
Yeah, and sure. just to round this off, like in Formula One as well, when there's discussion about calendar changes and races being lost, there's an outcry over losing kind of heritage races. And I see that argument of passionate, long-established, loyal fan bases where the sport grew and that sort of thing. But, like you say, there's practical realities for people in other parts of the world which are very different. And for MotoGP particularly, more than Formula One, those countries have huge motorcycle racing fan bases. And potentially growing ones as well, whereas I don't know how much capacity there is for a European interest in MotoGP to grow. I don't think Dorna is looking for more corners of Europe it can particularly exploit. It's the US and the wider world. So yeah, I'm with you on that. As much as I love I get a kick out of seeing any bike racing at Mugello. Just it sort of touches you in a way that somewhere less established and less evocative doesn't, for me at least. But it's I do see that argument that Europe is not short of races that are relatively close to each other. Sort of staying roughly on this sort of wider sporting context grounds, Duncan from Glasgow says, are Dorna just trying to sell MotoGP or both MotoGP and World Superbikes? Can the EU or whoever really block potential acquisition by Liberty Media, Formula One's owner, on the grounds of competition when Dorna currently owns both World Superbikes and MotoGP? And if the two championships are commercially separated, do you think that'd be good for bike racing as a whole? And which championship do you think is better at the moment? So quite a lot to unpack in there, Simon. Let's look at, what's your take on all the talk of Dorna trying to offload a championship or two and potentially Liberty being interested?
So let's start with a little bit of a history lesson and an explainer. The reason that, so the company that is for sale here is Dorna, who own both World Superbikes and MotoGP. Dorna is 40% owned by an investment firm called Bridgepoint. It is 40% owned by the Canadian Public Pensions Plan. So if you are a Canadian public servant, then your pension owns MotoGP randomly. And then the final 20% is owned by the staff of Dorna, led by the Espeleta family. It sounds like what is realistically for sale right now is the Bridgepoint 40%. Plus maybe some of the others, certainly some of the Espeleta share, maybe some of the Canadian share, but it's not the entire organization that's for sale. It's chunks of it. But it is the chunks of it, those chunks of it are chunks of the company that owns both World Superbikes and MotoGP. So there's no plan right now to spin off one of those or the other. If that happens, it'll be a decision made by a new majority shareholder if we get one, but that's like way down the line right now. Secondly, the reason that Dorna owns World Superbikes is a bit of a strange one. Bridgepoint, the company that owns 40% of it, at the time owned considerably more of it because they hadn't sold a bit of it to the Canadian Pension Plan. I think this is like 2012. And they bought an Italian company called Infront to get access to the TV football rights that Infront owned at the time, and accidentally ended up owning the whole of the company, including the World Superbike Championship, which they then promoted. So they moved that chunk from Infront, who still exist, and actually weirdly now run the MXGP World Championship. They moved the World Superbike chunk over to Dorna and integrated the two. I think that they kind of got it sneaked past the European Monopolies Commission, and I don't think they would get away with it if they tried to do it today, as the two championships have kind of narrowed their path from production 1000cc racers and 500 Grand Prix bikes into, essentially the same bikes, but slightly slower, like we've got right now in one paddock. So I don't know if that would go through again. And it could be that the way that we see World Superbike spun off is as some sort of a horse trading exercise. If, say, Liberty Media do try to buy MotoGP while still owning F1, and the European regulator says, okay, you can own both of those series, but you can't also own World Superbikes. So that maybe is a bit of trading that could be done in the future. There would be buyers for World Superbikes. I think that what is now the Discovery, Warner Brothers Discovery Group, which is who own TNT Sports, who own Eurosport, they have an events arm, and Eurosport events arm owns the Endurance World Championship. And I think that they would potentially be interested in World Superbikes if the opportunity presented itself. So there is potential buyers, but it's not something that's on the radar right now, and it all depends on what happens with Dorna preparing to sell, or with Bridgepoint preparing to sell Dorna first. They are absolutely trying to sell it. That's basically a given whenever you speak to people in the private equity business rather than the sports business, because they're doing all sorts of restructuring and internal stuff that companies do before they sell a company that they own. So there's a sale coming. But there's a whole mess of legalities and potential buyers, and there's a lot to figure out before we can really answer most of the questions that Duncan has asked there. That wasn't a very helpful answer, but it's the best I can give you. Sorry.
A lot of useful information in that one, though. So I feel more educated on the makeup of all these companies ahead of whatever comes next. So I said earlier that a few people on the listener questions asked about the first Pirelli era Moto2 race in particular. Now, the mention of Pirelli can send a shudder down some people familiar with it in other championships. I would say to all those who are kind of regular critics of controlled tyre suppliers, I feel massive sympathy for any company. Okay, they're getting paid to do it, but any company, in some cases at least, any company taking on controlled tyre supply in international motorsport, because you're basically there to be abused if it doesn't go well and then completely ignored if it does go well. It seems a fairly thankless task, and frankly, if I was the head of a tyre company, I would not be doing it. But Dan asked about the Moto2 race fluctuations and how the Pirelli tyres had been received in the paddock so far. And Etienne from Montreal in Canada said, I was left confused by the Qatar Moto2 race and the huge variation in lap times. Is this a case of poor tyre quality for some? Is it difficulty adjusting to the new rubber or something else? Any info from the paddock? Was this a one-off or is it a new reality of Moto2? So, Simon, how are the Pirellis being received in the paddock so far? And what was going on in the Qatar race?
First of all, I have to say that I really hope that Etienne is a public servant in Canada, because if they are, they own part of MotoGP. So hello, shareholders.
Etienne, it's partly up to you to decide what happens next.
Exactly. This is your problem to fix, not ours. I have to admit, I haven't had a whole lot of time to get much in the way of Pirelli feedback yet from the MotoGP paddock. Largely because that's the sort of conversation you have on like a Thursday, and the entire paddock got in flights on Sunday night after Qatar and went home. So it's going to take a few days we'll figure out and put them out, get a little bit of a better idea of what people are saying and thinking. But I mean, the gut feeling is that what we saw in Qatar is the new reality, and that for the first time in their Grand Prix racing lives, these guys are being forced to think about tire management, and a lot of them clearly just didn't. What we saw was it's fairly textbook as a result of people going too hard and burning out their tires. Look at what Pedro Acosta did in the MotoGP race, and then imagine a race where instead of one rookie doing that, 20 people did it, and that's essentially the Moto2 race that we saw. It's just going to be something they're going to have to get used to. It's a good thing, don't get me wrong. I don't think that Pirelli have made a mistake here. I think that this is something that is going to prepare riders to be better MotoGP riders as they step up. If Aldeguer, who had an absolute disaster in Qatar, can turn it around in the next few months and really learn how to manage these Pirellis and get back to winning ways, then the value of Ducati's investment in him has gone up, because he arrives with new skills and more skills. If Pedro Acosta had done a season on Pirellis in Moto2 before moving up, maybe his first race would have ended in fifth. He wouldn't have dropped back through the pack because he would have more understanding of what he's doing. It's just going to take a bit of time. It's going to take a bit of time to discover if that theory is the right one or not. But it's looking like it is. And if it is the case, it's going to take a few more rounds to get people dialed in on it.
I mean, I'm both with and against Simon on this one. I think he is generally correct in the fact that it's made, first of all, it has made Moto2 races better. There's a really good Moto2 race at the Losail International Circuit with the new Pirellis, and it is a skill like any other. It is clearly a valuable skill to learn in terms of managing these tires. I think there's no way the season looks like it did in Losail throughout, because there was like you mentioned Acosta, but the scale of the situation was completely different. Acosta's fastest lap was like 2 seconds up on his final lap. In Moto2, the difference between the fastest laps people were running and the laps they were running till the end, especially those who burned up their tires, it's like it was approaching 4 or 5 seconds. Like the tires they went really quick for the guys that they did go for, and then the rest of the races they could have parked. Some of them I think did. I think Isan Guevara parked because he went gung-ho immediately, got into the 2-minute margin. So I have nothing left, had to park up. We had Tony Arbolino and Fermin Aldeguer running over 2 for basically like the entire race distance. And it is a skill. It is valid. I think it is legitimate, extremely legitimate as a race outcome. It all goes back to a philosophical question, an annoying philosophical question, and I think a disagreement that somebody like me has and somebody like Simon has, which is, what do you actually want primarily Moto2 to be? If Moto2 is a thing within itself, if Moto2 is a championship where winning it is the end goal more so than getting MotoGP teams to see who's actually good at what is required in MotoGP, then I think this is good. This is fine, because this is just part of the game. Yeah, okay, this will be a championship where you have to be a tire whisperer. That's fine. That's a skill. It's a very valuable, very cool skill, makes for good races. If Moto2 is a feeder for MotoGP, then, okay, we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But I think MotoGP teams learned nothing in Qatar. I think none of them saw anything worth of taking in any sort of way, shape, or form. Except maybe one or two of them will have thought, oh, Alonso Lopez is quite good. Maybe we should reconsider that one, which I think is fair enough. That would be a fair takeaway to take. But otherwise, for talent scouting, it didn't look like anything to me. So I was very much in two minds watching it. I enjoyed the race a lot. It was a good race. I think historical status of Moto2 and 250cc suggests that it deserves to be a thing in its own. But it is also, MotoGP just matters more to me in terms of outcomes, and MotoGP prospects matter more to me than Moto2 championships. I think, for instance, that why am I going into this? Okay, I think, for instance, that Fabio Di Giannantonio is already a more successful rider than Tito Rabat, which might be heresy, for instance, but you see what I mean. Fabio Di Giannantonio has won a MotoGP race. Tito Rabat never came close, but Tito Rabat is a Moto2 world champion. I value that less than a Premier Class win. And there's a lot of people who will say, looking at MotoGP history, that that's nonsense. But that's how I see it as a relative latecomer. And for me, Moto2 needs to be really close to MotoGP in terms of what exact skills it prioritizes, and Qatar did not look that way. Which is not to say that the rest of the season, that teams won't just get on it, riders won't get on it, and it'll look more normal. The Moto3 race with Pirelli's was completely normal and fine. Everybody who we expected to run at the front ran at the front. So actually, who the hell knows?
I think the Moto3 race actually kind of cements my belief that this is a tyre management game now, because the comparatively huge difference in power between the bikes would kind of imply that the Moto2 bikes were just chewing up tyres. I think that Qatar, no one's going to decide anything on Qatar, but if this is the way that the future plays out, if this is the new reality where tyres do have to be managed, it is going to become a really useful thing for MotoGP teams to see who's good at it and who's not going forward. It's just going to take a while for everyone to kind of find their level in the new reality again. I think that the cream will still rise to the top, as it always does, and they'll be better for it. It's just going to take a bit of time to get there. And on the point of championships and their worthwhile and their value, I think that is so completely dependent on the era that it's super hard to say sort of one championship versus another, depending on the year. I agree with you that Fabio Di Giannantonio's MotoGP win is more valuable than, say, Tito Rabat's Moto2 World Championship, but Jorge Lorenzo's 250 Championship wins are worth more than Rabat's Moto2 ones were, or more than Di Giannantonio's race win. So it's all about the here and now whenever it comes to that sort of thing. Right now, Moto2 is not the same value, but I think that is partly because of decisions made to diminish Moto2 and Moto3 relative to MotoGP by the people who promote them more than anything else. They're trying to make it a feeder series, and we're seeing that.
I mean, even the change of the championships and how they were branded. Maybe it's just the way my brain goes, but MotoGP, Moto2, Moto3 sounds much more like a ladder, and a hierarchical ladder than 125.
Yeah,
250 and MotoGP, it's more of this is your route to the big one, basically. Well, we talk about tyres, that makes me think of pit stops potentially, and here's a question about refueling stops in MotoGP from Lachlan Babbage, who says, I've been on an endurance motorcycle racing binge watching recent Suzuka 8 Hours and Bol d'Or. Seeing how those races and teams handle refueling, it got me wondering how feasible introducing refueling for the new MotoGP regs in 2027 is. Before you answer that, Lachlan also says, please give Simon a day off soon. Now, Lachlan, I have tried to give Simon days off repeatedly for the previous 4 years, and he always says, no, I'll continue working beside the swimming pool on my holiday. And then do the articles get filed on time? I've sometimes mentioned Simon's relationship with deadlines on this podcast. Yeah. However, since some reshuffling at the race, I think Val is now MotoGP editor specifically, so Simon's days off are Val's responsibility from here. So Lachlan, it's all in Val's hands. Anyway. Refueling MotoGP, what do you reckon?
Nah, it's just not Grand Prix. It's not what we do. It's not the nature of the sport. It's not how it's ever been. I'm happy to leave it to endurance, which is a spectacle all of its own and should be watched by far more people, because endurance racing is just incredibly good. I love it. Maybe even more than MotoGP, which is a big confession to make on this podcast, but I absolutely adore it. But it is its own thing. It's a different thing. It's a different skill set. I don't think there's any place for it in Grand Prix racing. But in saying that, I do think we're probably going to get a pit stop at Phillip Island this year because of what we saw in World Superbikes and how well the tyres just didn't last. Because every time they resurface Phillip Island, it turns out to be super aggressive, and then the tyre companies have a disaster. You would imagine that someone at Michelin is very, very, very kindly begging Pirelli for their World Superbike data right now so that they can change the allocation that we take there, though I'll give you that.
Yeah, Lachlan did ask as a part 2 in his question whether we are already certain to see mandatory pit stops at Phillip Island after what happened in World Superbike. And are we in a position where actually we get to Friday at Phillip Island and then have to have that debate on the fly, or could this be a situation where it's actually agreed beforehand that it's just what happens?
Oh no, it's almost entirely always done on the fly in motorbike racing. Like yeah. You say like, could we be having this debate on the Friday? We could be having this debate on the Sunday morning after the sprint.
Yeah,
like that is, that's
yeah.
I mean, to be fair, they have to run at the track before they know. Maybe there'll be a contingency plan, but you have to. Pirelli with World Superbike, they did have a test to see what was up, and we won't have a test. I also have a big confession to make. I like MotoGP more than endurance, and considerably so. And I would just like pit stops and any form of pit stops and anything like that to be kept away from this particular format. I think pit stops is what you have when the rest of the racing is not good. And certainly refueling is also very much in that sort of category for me. I don't really mean that fully. I think there's very much a time and a place for it. And I think it's good that endurance racing covers that particular niche, but just MotoGP it's not something MotoGP, like if somebody felt it was worthwhile, it would be item number 483 on the priority list. I think we're all right with the format we have. We're good. We do not need bikes in the pit lanes. We don't need the chaos of riders coming in and, I don't know, hitting staffers or something while they learn how to do a pit stop at speed. The refueling hoses going wherever, covering the entire, I don't know, track with oil or something. It's just too much of a hassle to fix something that isn't really broken. But it would also, like, once or twice I would probably like to see that actually.
I don't mind the odd bike change, mixed weather race. That's fine. As a bit of variety. I know Simon's shaking his head. I understand from a safety and chaos aspect. I get it.
Yeah.
From a pure fan wanting something different in such a long season, I kind of like the variety of it.
No, I get it.
I'm a bit shameless in saying that. As Lachlan's opened the door to discussing the new regulations a little bit, Duncan also asked briefly about the process for those. Is this something where they'll actually be published perhaps this year? And then do manufacturers get to veto the changes? Well, is there a danger of manufacturers wanting to protect their investments in the current tech? Simon, quick answer on that. Can you see the manufacturers watering down what is planned for the next generation regulations?
I had a good talk in Qatar with one, those people who like circulate and race paddocks and no one knows who they are, but they're incredibly important. There's a Dutchman who works in MotoGP called Ben Sibirna, who is the Secretary General of the Motorcycle Sports Manufacturers Association, the MSMA, which is one of the key components of the Grand Prix Commission. We had a good catch up, mainly because we're both massive rugby fans. And he said that, the process is coming along quite nicely. They're hoping that basically, I think that they will agree a set of rules within themselves, which will then go to the Grand Prix Commission for the Grand Prix Commission as a whole, which involves Dorna, involves the FIM, involves safety partners. They will then all combine, involves Michelin. They will combine their thoughts into what the MSMA have come up with, and they'll hash out a set of rules through there. But it sounds like the process is moving forward pretty well. Everyone's roughly in agreement, and we should get a new road book maybe even before the summer break this year, so that the teams know what they're working with going forwards.
Let's go to the voice notes, and this one is from Thomas.
I live in Brno, so recently I heard some news that got me really excited and hopeful for the future. That at the end of last summer, another guy named Carl, not Carl Abraham, but another Carl, a millionaire apparently. His cousin is also the owner of Claritas, which is an insurance company or something like that. And it just seems like they got a lot of money. They bought the track, and they promised to keep everything going there. And I hope that in the future, maybe they'll handle some of the resurfacing and maybe bring back some of the prestige of the good old Brno racing days. I just want to hear your guys' opinion if you heard about any of this and if you think there's a chance of it coming back. I really appreciated the feedback you gave last time, which was almost 2 years ago now. And but just hearing this, it gives me some optimism that something actually might change in the future and there might be a chance to race at this awesome track. If you ever get a chance to race a bike there yourselves, I highly recommend it. It's a very nice track and a lot of fun.
Personally, I'm very keen on Brno coming back. It's another one of those circuits. I know I said earlier we should get rid of European races, but then there's the instinctive part of me that just loves a undulating, flowing track. Really, if a track's got a hill in it, I'm interested, to be honest. That's probably all I need. So, Simon, what do you know about Brno's prospects, just for generally being kind of revitalised and whether it could ever get back on the MotoGP calendar?
I mean, the thing is that all that Brno needs to get back onto the MotoGP calendar is a resurfacing. It's not a huge amount of work. It is a lot of money. Yes, don't get me wrong. Like we're talking a multi-million-pound project, but whenever you've just spent probably multi-million pounds buying the place in the first place, then there is the money there. You would imagine. We need to see. We need to see with the new owner what he wants to do with it. It sounds like, thankfully, his intention is to keep it as a race circuit, which is quite nice because, there was previously rumours that it was going to be knocked down and turned into housing, that we were going to lose the track completely. But, we have a new owner now whose main business is kind of running business parks and science parks. So he gets this sort of space. It's hard to tell without knowing more about the ins and outs of the deals, to be perfectly honest, but we can only hope. And the fact that it doesn't need a whole lot of money spent on it to get back onto the MotoGP calendar, fingers crossed, because I think pretty much everyone universally would love to have it back. It's a fan favourite, it's a rider favourite, it's a team favourite, and it was a sellout crowd, so it was a Dorna favourite too.
Motorcycle Hustle has asked via our new MotoGP only social accounts at the Race Moto on X/Twitter and Instagram. We'll be putting plenty straight to social stuff out over the coming Portimao race weekend. So if you haven't followed us on those channels yet, please do. But Motorcycle Hustle asks, when you guys say naturally talented, referring to some riders, what are you looking at when comparing to other not naturally talented riders? What makes a rider naturally gifted? Val, what was your definition for this?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I think it's something that we don't particularly think about. I think we just use that term intuitively. And when it comes to talent, like even outside of MotoGP, talent's just that sort of nebulous word that you just use to mean whatever you want it to mean in that particular moment, right? It's not like there's a MotoGP gene in people. We were not built to do this. There's no evolutionary strand that makes you go bananas on a motorbike. Again, all of this is an affront to the natural order of things. It was never supposed to be. This is all wrong in a way. So for me, that's why this made me pause and think, because I do say talented a lot and naturally talented and that kind of stuff. What do I mean by that? Because I guess even simple dichotomies like, physical attributes and mental attributes, you could use it for both, right? And you could sort of pick out things from both sets of categories, and maybe physical and mental isn't even a good dichotomy. Maybe you shouldn't really use that anymore. Maybe we know more about the human body now to think about it that way. But I would say, for me, the three categories specifically for bike riding where somebody feels naturally talented is one would be agility on the bike. So it's just the way you move and how flexible you are in many of those ways. That's for me is part of talent. A second is reaction time. That's part of the natural talent for me again. I don't want to include bravery because all the bravery talk always bores me nonstop. All these guys are already very brave, if we want to use that word. brave. I think it is brave to get on a bike, but it's like we hold it up as some sort of societal definite good. And let's not like toot our horns here. This is a really cool thing to do, but it's not, firefighters going into burning buildings, right? It's an affront to the natural order. We climb on these super, super fast machines. And when I say we, I mean they. I do not do it. And the third one, and I think this is actually the one that we usually mean, is adaptability. So naturally talented is how quickly, when getting on a bike, can you hit the lap time where you more or less are supposed to be, which is when we say stuff like Pedro Acosta is probably more naturally talented than Augusto Fernandez. We say it because we see Pedro Acosta get to a lap time in a lot fewer laps and just a lot less time than Augusto Fernandez would. And that applies to basically, I think that is how we judge most people on the grid when it comes to talent, even though that always is a combination of factors. And also that, there's always personal stuff going on in the background. Like, why hasn't somebody adapted as well as they could have? Well, they could have also just gone through something bad in their lives that we don't really think about or know about. But generally, for me, talented seems to be used as a shortcut to adaptability, and I'm okay with it. I think that's widely understood as a construct within our parts of the world.
For me, it's essentially processing power. The faster guys have a faster processor. They have their brains are able to better cope with speed. They're able to think faster whenever things go wrong, so that they catch a crash or they make their way out of a situation that would be trouble for someone else. They have better coordination because their system's working better. It comes down more than anything else to me to the way that their brains are wired, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're smarter. Although, don't get me wrong, all of the fastest bike racers I know are the smartest ones as well. They're the ones who are able to think through situations, but they're able to think through them really, really quickly. For me, the example of natural talent personified is Marc Marquez making incredible saves at insanely high speeds that would be a crash for everyone else. And it's because he has the ability to sense what's happening. His brain has time to process it and then to find a way out of it, a pathway to escape that dangerous situation in a time that others can't do it in. And that is essentially what it comes down to. It's why the fastest guys are also the luckiest, because it's not really luck. It's their body reacting in a way that lets them get away with it, because that I think is pretty much universal across all athletes. And I think it's why you can, to an extent, take world-class athletes in one sport and change them into another and still see them be, Valentino Rossi 1.5 seconds off Schumacher's time, his second ever time sitting in an F1 car, or Cal Crutchlow being essentially able to lead out Mark Cavendish at the Tour de France if the opportunity presented itself. It's because the skills that make you great, the skills that really make you different from someone who is incredibly fit, are mental.
But you say mental, but it sounded like kinetic in that.
It's mental is not the right word for it. It's kind of it's when I say mental, I mean that as a combination of brain chemistry and the way that the electrons in your head fire. Sure. But what I mean is it's not about how fit you are.
I get
it's not about pure anaerobic or aerobic rate. It's beyond that. It's.
No, I think the kinetic specifically part of it, that also does make a lot of sense to me as a definition. It's just what they're able to feel through their body, and how much that field, how quickly it translates in their brain, which is, I guess, part reaction time, but part just this sort of, there's no better word than feel for me for it, even though that's annoyingly nebulous and imprecise. But I think you gotta go to sports scientists for a more precise answer there.
I should also throw in that I've got a friend who has a theory that she studies diseases, and there's a disease that humans catch from cats called toxoplasmosis that's really, really difficult to detect, but it makes you seek out risk more. And she's absolutely certain that all motorbike racers have cats.
Sorry, so you're trying to tell me all bike racers are Catwoman, basically?
Well, is that cat owners.
No, like specifically, like they got bit by a radioactive cat and now they have reflexes like a cat, and they...
No, it's these cats don't have to be radioactive, trust me.
This was going so well until we suggested that the key to motorcycle racing success is to be bitten by a cat.
I'd like to point out that Val is the one that ruined this, not me.
And I would like to point out...
I was making a scientific point. I was trying to sound clever.
I would like to point out that actually, first of all, I did not mean to diminish what Simon's friend says. That was not it. And secondly, Catwoman does not get bitten by a radioactive cat. I was just using a popular
You're thinking
shorthand.
of Spider-Man.
Yeah, there is a different Catwoman origin story. She, gets thrown into a toxic pit or something, and then cats nurse her back to life. Oh, okay. I'm going to look this up on Wikipedia now.
You're digging yourself into a hole.
You do that. I'll bring this back onto something roughly relating to the podcast. I have a confession that when my shorthand in my head for whether a rider or driver is naturally talented, naturally gifted or not, it's often more to do with how much work they have to put in to get to their potential. And I don't want to diminish how much work even the very best put in. Someone like Marc Marquez has put in a lot of work to maximise his skills over the years. And I definitely don't want to diminish a rider or driver who improves through their career. But I think you can make a distinction. Someone who's just come in, and with this kind of Acosta Marquez comparison, someone who comes in and just hits the times, moves through the categories very quickly, proves themselves in MotoGP very quickly, versus someone... I'm not going to necessarily name any names here, who you just see kind of creeping up on you as they have more time in a particular category and get better and better. And that's because their adaptation is slower, but they get to, maybe their peak isn't as high, but through the time and experience, they can access or develop more and more of their ability, which is the sad thing, though, is all they really need to do, it turns out, was just go and buy a cat and cuddle them really tightly, and it would have saved a lot of years of Moto3. So, right. I'm going to not ask Val what his... okay, go on then. What does your research show up?
It apparently, in some versions of Catwoman, she does get bit by a radioactive cat, so maybe I know more than I think.
Maybe in a acidic pit or not. Who knows? Right, finally, Dan, one more audio question. Dan, you're having two, because this one just tickled me too much not to.
We've had your top 10 rider predictions. Who's in your bottom 3 for the year? Be interested to know.
So the bottom 3 in the championship is almost always a combination of people who've done a couple of wild cards and scored an odd point or two through attrition, or people who were missing from a lot of the season due to injury. So where I think we're looking is more kind of the bottom 3 on pure performance terms. So for instance, last season, I would probably have put Joan Mir as I know he missed some races, but not loads, as the bottom of the championship effectively. With Raul Fernandez and Taka Nakagami above him. Alex Rins was in there scoring-wise, but Alex Rins missed a huge chunk of the season. Technically, the lowest person who actually scored points last season was Khorounzhiy, but that's based on a one-off wildcard. Iker Corona and Alvaro Bautista had 0 last year. But technically, the way Dan's thinking, I think our bottom 3 last year was Nakagami, Raul Fernandez, and Mir. Mm-hmm. So who will be the bottom 3 in terms of actual straightforward performance this season? Simon, you go first.
Taka Nakagami, Augusto Fernandez, and Luca Marini.
Oh, poor Luca.
Sorry, Luca.
Who's last of those? Sorry, who's last?
Taka's last.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Taka's last.
Val, what's your bottom 3?
Yeah, it's the same list, except Augusto and Luca are swapped around. It'd be Augusto Fernandez as third to last, Luca Marini second to last, Taka Nakagami as last.
Yeah, I think I'd go with that as well. Nakagami at the bottom. Unless something dramatic changes for Augusto Fernandez, probably just above. And I've just got... There's something about how miserable Mir's Honda career has been so far that I just see him falling off bikes enough times that it could be him, not Marini, who ends up bottom of the pole, though Marini's guitar was particularly... It's the actual getting to the finish of races on this bike just seems beyond Mir so much.
I think the thing with Mir is he'll deliver 1 or 2 impressive results, like India last year, where that'll just... True. Boost them up a little bit, whereas the others, are genuine single points contenders at times.
Yeah, I agree.
But obviously, MotoGP being MotoGP, we're going to end up with another injury-strewn year, and the actual bottom 3 in the championship are going to be like Cal Crutchlow, Michele Pirro, and Danilo Petrucci or something.
I should say I don't feel super comfortable about Marini definitively outperforming Nakagami, for instance, because you never know with
I do.
Well, you're talking about single points contention. I think genuinely, Nakagami, just through being himself, might gather enough of those single points. I think there is a clear dichotomy there right now, where Johan Zarco and Joan Mir are clear as the 2 Honda leads. But I'm still not entirely clear as to what goes on behind them in terms of the situation.
Just flicking back to the previous year, to 2022, this is something that I am sure will not be repeated. The bottom three in kind of performance in the championship that year were the three rookies, Raul Fernandez, Remy Gardner and Darren Binder. We will not have this year's rookie in the bottom part of the championship. I'm very certain of that. So, listeners, thank you for all the questions. Now, all the questions came accompanied by some degree of thanks for the podcast, thanks for the amazing work, and really, really kind comments. And we really appreciate that. That means a hell of a lot to us, because as much as we're a bit flippant about Jack Miller, race pace, Maverick Vinales only being quick on Fridays, actually, we've got a lot of respect for everything about MotoGP and what the riders and what the teams do. It is awesome. It is against the possibilities of nature and amazing. Genuinely, this championship and talking about it is so exciting, even in its most boring, relatively boring races. It is really fun watching MotoGP and then talking about it on the podcast afterwards with these guys. So this is so enjoyable to do and such a privilege to get to do. And the fact that you do find us quite enjoyable to listen to is absolutely lovely. So thank you for letting us know, and I'm really glad that we can give you some audio amusement and insight every week. We'll try our best to do it again on Monday morning by the time it reaches you. The Portuguese Grand Prix is this weekend. Let's see what happens at a track where they haven't tested for half a week beforehand. Simon, Val and I will be back in your ears fresh from Portimao. We'll speak to you again then. Thanks for your time and for your questions.
The Athletic.